Hello and happy Friday. Welcome to another Real Talk with Claudia. I'm your host, Claudia Ellis of Claudia's Decor. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Around here, we don't really do lectures. We don't pretend we've got life figured out. We just pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, and have honest conversation about life, business, and everything in between. Because the truth is, you can't separate the business from the person building it. So before we get started, tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing where everybody's checking in from. Are you working today? Are you in your craft room? Are you hiding in your office hoping nobody asks you for anything for the next hour or two? Because that happens, you know it does. I've got my water. Hopefully you've got your drink of choice. Let's just spend some time together this morning. I've been paying attention to myself this week. Do you ever do that? Not in a weird way. You notice your own habits. Like I've been really caught up with noticing the things that I tend to do, the things that I need to lean into or go into a little bit more. And I've caught myself doing something that made me laugh. It wasn't funny in the moment. It was funny after I realized what I had done. I sat down to work. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not kinda knew. Not the I should probably. I knew exactly what I was going to do. There was one thing on my to-do list that would actually move my business forward. One thing. Instead, I answered a couple of emails and then I thought, you know what? Let me straighten up my desk real quick. Which somehow turned into I should probably organize these papers. And then that turned into why is this drawer such a disaster? Have you ever had a 5-minute project become 45 minutes? Please tell me I'm not alone. Because by the time I was done, my desk looked fantastic. Everything was organized. Everything had a place. I felt productive. I even had that little feeling of accomplishment. You know the one where you kind of lean back and think, wow, I got a lot done. Except I hadn't done the one thing I originally sat down to do. Isn't it amazing how our brains will celebrate that? Seriously, our brains don't go, excuse me, weren't we supposed to be working on something else? Nope. They're perfectly happy because technically you were busy. And I started thinking, I wonder how many of us do that. Not just with cleaning a desk, with life. We stay incredibly busy. We're exhausted. We're checking things off the list. We're running errands, answering emails, returning phone calls, making dinner, doing laundry, taking care of everybody else. We collapse into bed at night thinking, I don't know where the day went. But if somebody asked us what actually moved your life forward today, would we have an answer? Before anybody starts feeling guilty, that's not where I'm going. Because this isn't about productivity. I actually think productivity gets way too much attention these days. Everybody wants another planner, another app, another morning routine, another productivity trick. I don't think that's our biggest problem. I think sometimes without even realizing it, we choose what feels familiar. Hi, Carly. Instead of what helps us grow. So we choose what feels familiar instead of what helps us grow. And the crazy part is we usually don't even notice we're doing it because familiar feels responsible. Okay, familiar feels safe. Familiar feels like, well, at least I accomplished something. But then weeks go by, months go by, sometimes years go by, and we find ourselves asking, why do I feel like I'm in the same place? Have you ever asked yourself that? Not because nothing's happening. Life is happening. You're busy. You're working hard. But there's this little voice that says, I thought I'd feel a little bit further along by now. Maybe it's your business. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's something you wanted to do for years. You keep moving, but somehow you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. I've been there. In fact, I think most of us have. And this week, as I was thinking about all of this, one sentence just kept coming back to me over and over again. Not because I read it somewhere, not because somebody said it, just because it seemed to explain so much. Growth requires discomfort, not punishment, not suffering, not misery, discomfort. And I wonder if one of the biggest reasons we stay stuck is because we've spent our entire lives trying to avoid the very feeling that requires us to move forward. I don't know. What do you all think? What do you think about that? But the more I was thinking about this, the more I realized I don't think we've ever really been taught what discomfort actually is. And maybe that's where this conversation really begins. Have we been taught what discomfort is? Think about it for a minute. From the time we're little, what are we taught? If something hurts, stop. If the stove is hot, don't touch it. If the street is busy, don't run into it. If something feels dangerous, pay attention. Those are good lessons. They keep us alive. But somewhere along the way, I think our brains started putting all discomfort into the same category. Physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, social discomfort, the discomfort of trying something new, the discomfort of making a mistake, the discomfort of looking inexperienced. Our brains just lump them all together and go, nope, avoid it. And honestly, that makes sense. Our brains are incredibly efficient. They're constantly asking one question: how can I use the least amount of energy possible? Think about it. Have you ever driven somewhere and realized you don't even remember that part of the drive? You got there safely, you stopped at the lights, you made the turns, but your brain was on autopilot. Why? Because your brain loves patterns. Once it learns something, it wants to keep repeating it. It's efficient. It's conserving energy. Now, here's where this gets interesting. What happens every single time you decide to grow? You're asking your brain to leave the familiar. You're asking it to build a brand new pathway, whether that's learning new software, going live, starting an Etsy shop, having a difficult conversation, setting a boundary, raising your prices, whatever it is, you're asking your brain to stop using the well-worn trail and start cutting through the woods. Kevin and I aren't exactly mountain climbers, but we've walked enough trails to know there's a huge difference between a path that's been walked 1,000 times and one that hasn't. The well-worn path is easy. You don't have to think much. You can almost even enjoy the scenery. But if someone says, I want to make a brand new trail right over there, Well, now you've got roots, branches, rocks, thorns. You're paying attention to every step. It's slower, it's harder, not because you're going the wrong way, but because nobody has walked that path before. And I wonder if that's what growth really feels like, not because you're failing, not because you're incapable, but because you're building something new. I think about when I first started making wreaths, there are things I don't even think about anymore. Measuring ribbon, making a bow, fluffing mesh, attaching florals. At one point, every single one of those things required my full attention. I'd watch a tutorial, pause it, rewind it, watch it again, try it, undo it, try it again. Now, some of those things I can do while I'm carrying a conversation. Not because I was born knowing how, because repetition turned the unfamiliar into the familiar. And isn't that true of almost anything? The first time you use new software, you think, this is so confusing. And that's me right now trying to learn Claude. I have a friend who is learning Claude and has shared with me that it really has helped them. And I'm like, I'm stuck because it's unfamiliar, because I don't know it, because I haven't used it before. Okay. So in order to make the unfamiliar familiar, I have to practice. I have to experiment. I have to put myself in the realm of learning it, right? Okay. So the first time you use new software, you think this is so confusing. 6 months later, you're wondering why everyone else thinks it's hard. The first time you go live, you're painfully aware of every word that comes out of your mouth, and later you're focused on the conversation that you forget the camera is even there. You forget the camera is even there. You're just having a conversation with the people that are watching you. Nothing changed overnight. You changed. But here's the mistake I think we make. We expect the beginning to feel like the middle. We expect day one confidence with day one experience. We expect to feel comfortable before we've earned comfort. And then we assume that something's wrong. Is it wrong? Is something wrong? What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be? What if feeling awkward, feeling uncertain, having to think through every step isn't evidence that you're failing? What if it's simply evidence that you're learning? I don't know about you, but that changes the way I look at discomfort. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? Maybe we start asking, what if the feeling is trying to teach me? Because maybe, just maybe, discomfort isn't standing in the way of growth. Maybe discomfort is what growth feels like when it's happening. And I think that's where I had the aha moment this week, because I realized there are actually different kinds of discomfort. Some discomfort protects us, but some discomfort invites us into a bigger life. And if we don't learn the difference, we'll spend our lives running away from the very things that we have been working towards and praying about. Think about that for a second. Not all discomfort is the same. If every uncomfortable feeling gets treated exactly the same, then of course we're going to avoid all of it. But maybe we shouldn't. For example, if you put your hand on a hot stove, that discomfort is trying to protect you. You don't stand there thinking, well, growth requires discomfort, and keep your hand on the stove. No. Your body is saying, danger. This is causing damage. That's healthy discomfort. It's protective. But then there's another kind of discomfort, the kind that isn't hurting you. It's stretching you. And I don't know that we always know the difference. Let me give you an example here. Have you ever started exercising after you've been sitting for a while? Not because you're lazy, just life. Life gets busy. One day turns into 1 week, 1 week turns into 1 month, and before you know it, your tennis shoes have become decorations by the front door. Then one morning you decide, today's the day, I'm going for a walk. So you do. You come home feeling pretty good about yourself. Then the next morning, everything hurts. You wake up and the muscles you didn't even know you had are introducing themselves. You don't usually say, well, I guess walking was a terrible idea. Why? Because you understand what's happening. Your muscles are adapting. You expect a little soreness. Now imagine if somebody had never heard of exercise before. They'd probably think this is awful. Why would anybody keep doing this? But because we understand the process, we don't panic. We know discomfort can be part of getting stronger. So here's the question that's been bouncing around in my head. Why are we so good at understanding that physically, but so bad about understanding it emotionally? Why do we accept that muscles get sore, but we get frustrated when courage feels uncomfortable? Why do we understand that learning a new craft takes practice, but expect confidence to happen overnight? Why do we celebrate somebody training for a marathon, but judge ourselves for needing time to grow? It's interesting, isn't it? Somehow we've decided emotional growth should be instant. Like if you're still nervous about trying something new, you must be doing it wrong. I don't think that's true. In fact, I've started wondering if some of the discomfort we're trying to get rid of never completely goes away. It just changes. Think about people who speak for a living. That's not me. I don't speak for a living. I speak to you guys on Fridays, but I don't speak for a living. I've heard interviews with actors, musicians, speakers, people who have done this for decades. And so many of them still talk about getting butterflies. Have you ever noticed that? I find it fascinating that people that have done this for a long time still get butterflies. Because I assumed there would come a day when they walked on stage and thought, no big deal. But apparently that's not always what happens. The nerves don't necessarily disappear. They just stop being in charge. And I love that thought because maybe the goal isn't to eliminate discomfort. Maybe the goal is to stop letting discomfort make the decisions. Those are two different goals. You know what I think about, wait, you know what I secretly hope? I hope that if we do something enough times, one day we will feel fearless. But what if courage isn't about becoming fearless? What if courage is simply becoming familiar with the feeling? You recognize it. You know what it feels like. You know your heart's going to beat a little faster. You know your stomach might do a few flips. You know you'll probably overthink it about 5 minutes beforehand, but you do it anyway. Not because it stopped being uncomfortable, because you've learned that discomfort isn't always telling the truth. Sometimes it's simply announcing you're doing something you've never done before. And honestly, I think that's a healthier expectation. Because if I believe I'll never feel uncomfortable again, I'm going to be disappointed. But if I understand that discomfort is just part of learning, then I stop fighting it. I stop asking, when is this finally going to go away or feel different or feel easier? And instead, I start asking, what is this season trying to teach me? there's a peace that comes with that. Not because everything suddenly becomes simple, but because you stop expecting growth to feel comfortable all the time. And that reminds me of something I've noticed in business that I think every entrepreneur experiences sooner than later. The moment you finally get comfortable in one season, life hands you a brand new one. And I know that we've all experienced that. Just when you think, okay, I've finally got this figured out, life goes, oh, that's cute. And suddenly you're learning something new all over again. Can I get an amen? Do you relate to this? I don't know why we expect that there has to be this magical place where everything just clicks and stays easy. Have you ever noticed that? We tell ourselves, if I can get through this, fill in the blank, whatever that may be for you, if I can just get this order finished, if I can just hit 100 sales, if I can just get monetized, if I just lose 20 pounds, if I just get through this busy season, if I just ... And then we get there for about 5 minutes. And then there's another mountain. There's another mountain. It's all a big joke. It's all a big joke. If we think that, once we reach the mountain, we've reached it. No, there's another mountain to climb, right? So we need to be aware of the discomfort that we feel after that win, and we're back to doing something different. It's all part of life. Okay? It's almost funny when you stop and think about it. I remember when I first opened my Etsy shop. Back then, I wasn't worried about scaling my business. I wasn't thinking about inventory management or systems or YouTube strategy or email marketing. And you know what I wanted? One sale. I just wanted one sale. I wanted somebody, some complete stranger who didn't know me, to look at something I had made and think, I want that. That felt huge. And then it happened. And I was so excited. Then you know what happened? I wanted another one. Then I wanted 10, then 50, then 100. And every milestone that once felt impossible eventually became normal. Isn't that interesting? The thing that once kept you awake at night becomes Tuesday. And then something new takes its place. I've seen it happen over and over. Someone says, if I could just get comfortable going live. And then they get comfortable. Now they're trying to figure out how to keep people engaged. Someone says, if I could just get customers, and then they get customers. Now they're trying to figure out time management. Someone else says, if I could just leave my full-time job, and then they do. Now they're responsible for creating every dollar that comes in. The discomfort doesn't disappear. It graduates. I actually like that. It graduates. Because every season asks something different of you. The version of you who was learning how to make a wreath isn't the same version of you that learns how to price it. And that version isn't the same one who learns how to photograph it, or write a listing, or package it, or handle a difficult customer, or teach someone else. Every stage requires a different version of you. And here's what I find encouraging. If you look back, every version of you probably thought, I don't know if I can do this. And somehow you did. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but you figured it out. Every once in a while, Facebook will show me one of those memories from years ago. Do those ever make you laugh when they pop up? Sometimes I'll look at one and think, oh my goodness, I thought that was really a good picture. And it wasn't. Or if I see one of my earlier wreaths and think, wow, I've learned a few things since then. But every now and then I'll stumble across an old post where I was worried about something that felt enormous at the time. And I can barely remember why it felt so big. Not because it wasn't real, it was, but because I've grown since then. Problems have a funny way of shrinking into the rearview mirror. Not because they were small, but because you're not the same person anymore. I think we forget to give ourselves credit for that. We're so focused on the next thing we have to accomplish that we don't look at what we've already accomplished, that we rarely stop and notice that we are no longer intimidated by the things that used to intimidate us. Think about your own life for a second. What's something today that feels completely normal that 5 years ago would have made you nervous? Really think about it. Maybe it's technology. Maybe it's going live. Maybe it's running a business. Maybe it's setting boundaries or saying no. Whatever it is, at one point, that was your uncomfortable thing. Now it's just part of your life. And I think that's worth celebrating because growth has this sneaky way of happening while you're busy looking ahead. We don't always notice it in the moment. Sometimes the only way you realize you've grown is by looking behind you. And maybe that's why it's so important to pause every now and then, not to live in the past, but to remind yourself that you've survived every stretch that's brought you to where you are today. Okay, that makes me wonder if you've already grown through so many uncomfortable seasons, why do we keep acting surprised when the next one shows up? Maybe that's just how growth works. Maybe every new chapter of our lives comes with a little uncertainty, a little stretching, and an invitation to become someone we couldn't have been if we stayed where we were. And that got me thinking about something else. Maybe the hardest part of growth isn't actually the discomfort itself. Maybe it's that we keep expecting growth to happen without asking us to let go of something first. Maybe the hardest part of growth isn't the discomfort. Maybe it's what growth asks us to leave behind. Because every time we grow, something has to change. And I don't know about you, but I don't always like change. I don't always welcome change, even when it's good, even when it's good change. Have you ever noticed that? We say we want something different, but we also want everything to stay exactly the same. We want to grow the business, but we don't want our schedule to change. We want healthier relationships, but we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. We want to get healthier, but we don't want to change what we're eating or make time to move our bodies. We want more peace, but we keep saying yes to everything. It's almost like we want the result without changing the routine that produced the life we already have. And I say we because I'm right there with you. I have caught myself saying, why isn't this changing? And if I'm really super honest, sometimes the better question is, why am I still holding on to fill the blank? Because here's what I've learned. Growth isn't just about adding things. Sometimes it's about subtracting. And I don't think we talk about that enough. We're always asking, what book should I read? What course should I take? What skill should I learn? And those are great questions. But every once in a while, I think we need to ask, what habit is keeping me where I am? Hey, Justin. What belief have I outgrown? What am I carrying that doesn't belong in the next season of my life? Those are harder questions because now we're not talking about learning something new. We're talking about letting something go. And letting go is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's a habit. Sometimes it's a routine. Sometimes it's the need to have everything perfect before you begin. You got to let that go. And can we talk about perfection for a minute? Because I think perfection has tricked a lot of us. We call it having high standards. We call it doing quality work. And listen, I believe in doing quality work. If you've watched me make wreaths, you know I care about details. I want my customer to open that box and smile. I want them to feel something and that somebody cared. I want them to feel something. I want them to know that I cared, right? There's nothing wrong with excellence, but excellence and perfection are not the same thing. Perfection keeps moving the finish line. Perfection says it's good, but not good enough. Maybe fix one more thing, maybe wait another week, maybe don't post it yet. Have you ever noticed that perfection never seems satisfied? It always wants one more adjustment, one more edit, one more rewrite, one more class, one more reason to wait. And before you know it, the opportunity has passed. And you know what I've discovered? Some of the biggest opportunities in my life didn't come because I had everything figured out. They came because I was willing to start before I knew everything. If I had waited until I felt ready, I wouldn't have experienced the blessing of growth. I probably wouldn't have started half the things I'm doing today. Not because I wasn't capable, because I would have talked myself out of it. I would have convinced myself I needed just a little more time, just a little more experience, just one more reason to delay. And the truth is, delay feels a lot safer than change, at least for a little while, but eventually delay becomes its own discomfort. Have you experienced that? You just putting stuff off? At first, it feels like relief. I'll deal with it later. Then later comes, now it's hanging over your head. You think about it while you're making dinner. You think about it while you're trying to fall asleep, right, Carly? You think about it every time it pops back onto your to-do list. Suddenly avoiding the discomfort has created more discomfort. It's ironic. The very thing you were trying to escape, we ended up carrying around with us anyway. That's when it hit me. We don't really get to choose whether life has discomfort. We only get to choose which discomfort, the discomfort of staying the same or the discomfort of growing. The discomfort of avoiding the conversation or the discomfort of having it. The discomfort of never trying or the discomfort of learning something new. Either way, there's going to be some stretching. So maybe the question isn't how do I avoid discomfort? Maybe the better question is which discomfort is leading me towards the life I actually want? Because one kind so slowly shrinks your world, the other kind, even though it's hard, has a way of opening it up. And I know that's where this conversation starts getting really personal. Because once you realize discomfort isn't the problem, you have to ask yourself another question. What have I been avoiding simply because it felt uncomfortable? And that's where I found myself doing some honest soul searching this week. Not because I don't know, How? Not because I don't have the resources, not because somebody is stopping me, just because it's uncomfortable. That's a different question. And I had to ask myself that this week, not in a guilt way, not beating myself up, just being honest. Because sometimes I think we can get so busy that we stop checking in on ourselves. We keep checking things off our to-do list, but we don't stop asking why we're doing or not doing certain things. So I started making a mental list. What are the things that make me hesitate? What are the things that I find myself pushing off to tomorrow? And here's what I noticed. It wasn't because they were impossible. Most of them weren't even a big deal. It was because they required something of me, a decision, a conversation, a commitment, a willingness to not know exactly how it was all going to turn out. And that's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable. Sometimes we make discomfort sound dramatic, like it has to be this huge life-changing decision, like quitting your job, moving across the country, starting a business. Sometimes growth looks like that, but more often, growth looks a lot smaller, a whole lot smaller. It's finally making the doctor's appointment you've been putting off. I know that hit a few. Sending the email you've rewritten 6 times. It's raising your hand in a meeting. It's asking for help. It's saying, I don't understand. Can you explain that again? Can we just pause on that for a second? Why is asking for help so hard? I've wondered that. Because if somebody asks me for help, I'm happy to help. I'm not judging them. I'm not thinking less of them. Most of the time, I'm thinking, I'm so glad they asked instead of struggling by themselves. So, why do I assume everybody else is going to judge me if I'm the one asking? Isn't that funny? We hold ourselves to a different standard than we hold everyone else. We're gracious with other people, patient with other people, understanding with other people. Then we turn around and expect ourselves to have all the answers. Who decided that? Because I don't think that's a very fair expectation. You know, something happened a while back that made me think differently about this. I was talking with someone. I honestly I don't even remember what we were talking about, but they asked me a question. And my first response was, I don't know. Then I caught myself. You know, the moment where your brain says, you should probably have a better answer than that. But instead of scrambling to sound smarter, I just stayed with it. I don't know. And then I said, but I can find out. That felt freeing because for some reason, I've gotten into this habit of thinking I needed to know everything before I was qualified to speak or teach or lead or create. But that's not true. None of us know everything. We're all learning. Every single one of us. Some people are just a little farther down the road in one area, and somebody else is farther down the road in another. That's the beauty of community. We get to learn from one another. We don't have to pretend we've already arrived. In fact, I think pretending we've arrived might actually keep us from growing. Because if we already know everything, then why would I stay curious? Why would I ask questions? Why would I keep learning? I think curiosity is one of the healthiest responses to discomfort. Instead of saying, I'm not good at this, what if we asked, I wonder how I could get better. Instead of, I can't do this, what if it became, I can't do this yet? That one little word changes everything. Not because it's positive thinking, because it leaves room for growth. And isn't that what we've been talking about this whole time? Growth isn't about arriving. It's about remaining teachable. It's about willing to admit I'm still learning. I actually think there's a lot of peace in that because it takes the pressure off. I don't think I don't have to be perfect today. I just have to be willing to keep growing. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized something else. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to growth isn't discomfort. It's our expectation that growth should happen quickly. We want transformation, but we want it on our timeline. And life doesn't usually work that way. Hi, Candy. Good morning. The more I thought about that, the more I realized. I think we're measuring the wrong things. We're looking for dramatic change. We want the before and after picture. We want the success story. We want the big milestone. But life? Life usually doesn't happen that way. It usually is so much quieter than that. So much quieter than that. Have you ever planted flowers? Or maybe tomatoes or herbs? Anything really? You don't put something in the ground on Monday, walk outside on Tuesday, and get frustrated because it isn't blooming yet. That would be ridiculous. You know something is happening, even though you can't see much of it. The roots are doing their thing long before the flower ever shows up. And yet, when it comes to ourselves, we don't want to give ourselves that same patience. We want one good decision, then another, then another. And because our lives don't look dramatically different after 2 weeks, we start thinking, well, I guess this isn't working. Have you ever done that? I have. Not just once, more times than I can count. I'll start something with all kinds of enthusiasm. And then a couple of weeks later, I'll catch myself wondering, shouldn't I be farther along by now? Right, Candy? Everything takes time and, of course, era, right? And if somehow years of habits are supposed to change overnight, I don't know why we do that to ourselves. If we have a habit, anybody that has a habit, you know how hard it is to break a habit, right? It takes a long time to build a habit as well. You have to build good habits and break bad habits, but it takes time. We are in a world that celebrates the highlight reel. Nobody posts, today I made another ordinary decision that nobody noticed. Nobody gets excited because they drank water instead of a soda. Or because they finally answered the email they've been avoiding. Could you imagine if people started posting that? I finally wrote the email that I've been avoiding for 3 weeks. Or because they got up and took a 20-minute walk. High five. Or because they spent 30 minutes working on their business instead of scrolling their phone. Those moments aren't flashy. Nobody claps. Nobody hands you a trophy. But you know what? Those ordinary moments stack up. And one day they become the story people call an overnight success. Isn't that funny? Never give up on everything. You get better as you go and learn. Yes, Candy. We love the phrase overnight success. But if you ever hear somebody's story, it was almost never overnight. It was years of ordinary decisions that nobody else saw, years of showing up, years of trying again, years of learning, years of adjusting, years of wondering if any of it was making a difference until one day everybody noticed. And I think that's where a lot of people quit, not because they're incapable, but because they're standing in the middle of the invisible part. You ever thought of it that way? If nobody's noticing all the things that you're doing, you are standing in the invisible part, the part where you're putting in the effort, but the results haven't caught up yet. That is such an uncomfortable place to be because your brain starts asking questions. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? Should I try something else? Maybe I'm just not good at this. Can I tell you something I've learned? The middle is messy. The middle is where your commitment gets tested. The beginning is exciting. The finish line is exciting. It's the middle that feels long. It's the middle that feels repetitive. It's the middle that makes you wonder if you're making any progress at all. But here's the thing, the middle is where almost all the growth happens. Think about learning anything. Nobody gets good because they started. Nobody gets good because they finished. They get good because they kept showing up in the middle. The middle is where you develop patience. The middle is where you solve problems. The middle is where you realize you can do harder things than you thought you could. And maybe that's why growth feels uncomfortable for so long. Because most of us live in the middle. Bye, Candy. Thanks for stopping in. I love you too. So most of us live in the middle, not at the starting line, not at the finish line, just in the ordinary days, making one more good decision, one more attempt, one more conversation, one more small step. And I wonder, what would happen if we stopped dismissing those little moments because they didn't feel significant? What if we started celebrating consistency instead of only celebrating milestones? Because when I look back over my life, the things that changed me the most weren't the big moments. Hi, Miss Sarah. They were the little decisions like that were made over and over again, that were made over time. The ones that didn't seem like they mattered until one day I realized they had quietly changed the direction of my life. And I think that's one of the biggest surprises about growth. Most of the time, you don't feel yourself growing while it's happening. You only recognize it when you stop long enough to look back. And maybe that's why it's so easy to become discouraged, because we're evaluating today's effort while growth is playing the long game. Maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. And it hit me while I was thinking about all this. We spend a lot of time talking about getting outside our comfort zone. Like, I just need to get outside my comfort zone. We've all heard that phrase. But I don't think anybody ever talks about what happens when you don't. Because I don't think your comfort zone stays the same size. I actually think it gets smaller. Think about that for a minute. The longer we avoid something, the bigger it becomes in our minds. Have you ever put off a phone call? Not because it was going to be a bad conversation, you just didn't want to have to make it. So you told yourself, I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow came and I'll do it after lunch, then maybe Monday. And before you know it, you've spent more energy avoiding the phone call than the phone call would have actually taken. Have you ever done that? I have, more than once. And it's funny how our imagination starts filling in all the blanks. Now we've convinced ourselves it's going to be awkward or difficult or emotional or complicated. And then you finally make the call, and 15 minutes later you're thinking, why didn't I just do that last week? Carly, shh, I have never done this. Yeah, guilty. We've all been there. The conversation wasn't nearly as hard as carrying it around in our heads. How often that happens is another area of our lives. Not just phone calls, dreams, goals, opportunities, the class we've wanted to take, the YouTube channel we've wanted to start, the Etsy shop you've been talking about, the business idea. Hold on a second. The business idea that's been sitting in a notebook for 2 years, the conversation you've needed to have, the boundary you've needed to set. The first step usually isn't getting harder. The picture of it is, because avoidance has a way of magnifying things. The longer we wait, the scarier it seems. And here's what I find really interesting. Our comfort zone feels safe, but it isn't always peaceful. I don't know that it is peaceful. Sometimes it's predictable, but peaceful? Not necessarily. Because I've had seasons where I stayed exactly where I was and I wasn't at peace. I was restless. Have you ever felt restless? Nothing was technically wrong. You were functioning. You were paying the bills, going to work, doing the things. But something inside kept saying there's more. Not more stuff, not more money, just more growth, more purpose, more learning, more becoming. I think all of us have had those seasons. And here's what I've learned about that feeling. Restlessness isn't always something to fix. Sometimes it's something to listen to. Now, I'm not talking about chasing every shiny object. And if you know me, you know I squirrel. Ooh, something shiny. Y'all know me better than that. Sometimes the best thing we can do is stay planted and be faithful right where we are. But there are other times that little nudge won't go away. You keep thinking about it. You keep coming back to it. You hear someone mention it and it catches your attention. You see someone else doing it and something inside you says, I wonder. Not I wish I were them, just I wonder if maybe it's time. I've learned not to ignore those moments quite so quickly, because sometimes they aren't asking me to change everything. Sometimes they're simply inviting me to take one small step. And maybe that's why we get overwhelmed. We're trying to figure out step 20 when all we have to really focus on is asking about step 1. I don't know about you, but my brain loves to skip ahead. I'll think, well, if I do this, then eventually I'll have to figure out that. And then what about this? And what if this happens? Anybody else? I can create a problem that doesn't even exist yet. Meanwhile, today's step is sitting right in front of me waiting. I wonder how much peace we'd have if we stopped trying to solve next year's problem and simply did today's work. Because growth has never asked me to have the whole map. It usually just asks me to trust the next step. And every time I've been willing to take it, the next one becomes a little clearer. Not because all the discomfort disappeared, but because movement has a funny way of bringing clarity. Standing still rarely does. And as I was thinking about this, I realized there was one more thing that surprised me about growth. It wasn't even the waiting. It was discovering that sometimes the person holding me back the most was me. It was me. Before anybody hears that and starts beating themselves up, that's not what I want to focus on or where I want to go. Because I don't think most of us intentionally stand in our own way. I think we're doing the best we can with the thoughts we've believed for a long time. Right, Sarah? And here's what I've noticed. We have conversation with ourselves all day long in our heads, out loud. We have conversations with ourselves all day. Some of them we don't even realize we're having. We're getting ready to post something and we tell ourselves nobody's going to care. You're thinking about trying something new and then you tell yourself you're probably too late. You make a mistake and then you throw your hands up. See, this is why you shouldn't have tried. It's almost like there's this little commentator sitting on our shoulder narrating everything we do. And sometimes that commentator is a little dramatic. Can we just admit that? Mine can be. I'll have one thing not go the way I planned, and before I know it, my brain has skipped about 6 chapters ahead. Well, if this doesn't work, then this won't happen. And if that doesn't happen, it's like, whoa, Claudia, we haven't even finished today yet. Why are we already living in next February? Anybody else do that? Can anybody else, relate to that? I think one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is learning to interrupt that conversation, not ignore it, not pretend everything is wonderful, just interrupt it. I've started asking myself a question. Is this actually true? Or is this just what I'm feeling right now? Those are not the same thing because feelings are real. They're absolutely real, but they aren't always accurate. I can feel discouraged and still be making progress. I can feel uncertain and still be headed in the right direction. I can feel uncomfortable and still be growing. See, somewhere along the way, I think we started believing that our feelings were supposed to tell us what to do. But what if they're better at telling us what needs our attention? That's different. Example, if I'm nervous before I go live, that doesn't automatically mean don't go live. It might simply mean this matters to you. If I'm uncomfortable learning something new, it doesn't automatically mean you're not cut out for this. It might mean you're learning. If I'm frustrated because I'm not where I want to be yet, maybe that frustration isn't proof that I'm failing. Maybe it's evidence that I still care. That changes the whole conversation. Because instead of fighting every uncomfortable feeling, I can get curious about it. I can ask, what is this trying to show me? Not, how do I make this go away? There's a big difference. You know, one of my favorite things about making wreaths is that every design teaches me something. Sometimes it's a new technique. Sometimes it's a ribbon combination I would have never thought to use. Sometimes it's, well, I'm never doing that again. But every project teaches me something, even the ones that don't turn out the way I imagined. And I started thinking, what if we looked at our lives that way? What if instead of dividing our experiences into successes and failures, we start asking, what did this teach me? Because if it taught you something, then it gave you something. Maybe not what you expected, but something valuable. When I look back over my life, there are seasons I would never choose to repeat. There are disappointments I wish that hadn't happened, plans that didn't work out, doors that closed. But even those seasons, they taught me something that success never could have. It taught me patience. It taught me perspective. It taught me resilience and empathy, how to pivot, how to let go, how to begin again. I wouldn't have signed up for those lessons, but I'm grateful I learned them. And I wonder how many of these things were frustrated, right? How many of these things were frustrated by today will eventually become the very experiences that help someone else tomorrow. Because isn't that how it usually works? The things that stretched us became the stories we tell. The things that challenged us became the wisdom we share. Not because we enjoyed them, but because they changed us. That's the point we've been circling around in this whole conversation. Growth isn't always comfortable. It isn't always fast. It isn't always obvious. But if we're willing to stay in the process, to keep showing up, to keep learning, to keep taking the next step, one day we'll look back and realize we didn't just accomplish more, we became more. And I think that's the kind of growth that's worth uncomfortable steps. Which brings me to one thought that I want to leave you with today. If you don't remember anything else from our conversation, I hope you'll remember this. And this is not just something for you, this is something for me too. Because I promise you, I'm not sitting over here with life all figured out. If anything, these Friday conversations challenge me just as much as they challenge anybody watching. And I think that's why I love them so much. We're learning together. We're growing together. We're asking questions together. And I hope that never changes. When we first started talking today, I asked a simple question. What if we're looking at discomfort all wrong? And I think my answer today is maybe we have. Maybe we've spent so much of our lives trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings that we've accidentally avoided some incredible opportunities to grow. Not because we didn't want them, not because we weren't capable, but because growth rarely sends an invitation that says, everything is going to feel easy from here. It usually whispers, come on, take one more step. And that step almost always feels a little uncertain, a little awkward, a little uncomfortable. But when I look back at my own life, the moments that shaped me the most weren't the easy ones. They were the moments where I almost talked myself out of trying, the moments where I wasn't sure, the moments where I wondered if I was enough, the moments where I wanted guarantees before I took the first step. And here's what I've discovered. Life rarely gives us guarantees, but it gives us opportunities. Sometimes they're disguised as hard work. Sometimes they're disguised as learning. Sometimes they're disguised as uncomfortable conversations. And sometimes they're disguised as the little nudge you just can't seem to ignore. If you've had one of those nudges lately, don't dismiss it too quickly. You don't have to have the whole plan today. You don't have to know how every chapter is going to unfold. You don't have to feel completely confident. Maybe all you need to do is take the next right step, just the one, because there's really a lot of growth, even in taking that first step, not in giant leaps, but in ordinary decisions that we make over and over again. I would love to know what your next step is. Not your 5-year plan, not your entire vision board. Just what's one thing you've been putting off because it felt uncomfortable. And maybe today is the day you stop avoiding it. Maybe today is the day you make that phone call. Maybe today is the day you finally hit publish. Maybe today's the day that you sign up for that class. Maybe today's the day you have the conversation you've been putting off. Maybe today's the day you simply decide, I'm done waiting until it feels easy. Because honestly, it may never feel easy. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth doing. Because before we wrap up, I want to thank every single one of you for spending this time on your Friday morning with me. I know you've got 100 things you could be doing, and it means a lot that you choose to spend this time here, whether you're here live every week or you're catching the replay over the weekend while you're working in your craft room. Thank you for being a part of this little community. I never take that for granted. If today's conversation encouraged you, I'd love for you to do 2 things. First, share it with someone who might need to hear it. We all know someone who's standing on the edge of something new, and maybe this conversation will give them just enough encouragement to take that first step. And second, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one area of your life you're choosing growth, even though it's uncomfortable? I read your comments. I really do. Some of my favorite conversations happen after the live is over. Now, next Friday, I want to talk about something that I think is going to hit home for just about every entrepreneur, every creative, every small business owner, and honestly, probably every busy human being. Our next Real Talk is called Busy Isn't Profitable. We're going to have an honest conversation about why being busy can actually make us feel successful while quietly keeping us from making any real progress. Because there's a difference between filling your calendar and moving your life forward. And I have a feeling that conversation is going to step on my toes just as much as anybody else's. So I hope you'll grab your coffee, your water, whatever it is that you like to drink, and come back next Friday. Until then, I hope you all have an incredible weekend. Take some time to breathe. Take some time to rest. Take one uncomfortable step forward for the life that you're building, because you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep moving forward. God bless you, sweet friends. I'll talk to you next Friday. Thanks for joining me on Real Talk with Claudia.